Hey, it's Stephanie. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Unwritten. And today's guest is Amanda Quick. She's not only a mom, but she's an author, speaker, and she's even been on TEDx. So she's a TED Talk speaker. Super exciting. What I really wanted Amanda and I to chat about today is just the importance of, it all starts with how we talk to ourselves. It doesn't matter the things that we've gone through in life. It just matters that every day we're making these little tiny steps towards loving ourselves more and accepting ourselves for all of it. So, Amanda, I think you're going to be, I know you're going to be an expert on this topic. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, tell me a little about who you are now and what your goals are and where you've been the last year or so.
Yeah, this last year has been crazy. Lots of super fun things. We've, moved, purchased a house. I delivered my first TEDx talk in February called The Healing Power of Storytelling. So very much in line with the conversation we're going to have here. And it took them 6 months to publish it. So the first part of the year was very much an anticipation for any moment they're going to be releasing. I also, continue to be on multiple podcasts, be interviewed on many different channels. And I am working on my next book. And I'm also just about to launch a new program to help other people share their stories, especially moms share their stories with the world, because so many people get stuck in the emotion and the challenge of what they went through that they want to write about it, but don't know where to start. They've got shame and judgments and guilt, and they need some support. And so using what I learned as I wrote my book and took my story to all of the various platforms, including the TEDx stage, I want to help other people do the same.
That's awesome. I'm kind of similar in that aspect with this podcast, like giving people a chance to use their voice and tell their story. But even through photography, really helping women see themselves in the best light. And it's such an important topic that we feel good about ourselves, and we feel good about the things that we've been through, and we feel good in our own bodies and comfortable in who we are. So I think that's
exactly.
We've got a good,
like for me, being able to use what I went through to support other people makes it worth it in a different way. I can have gratitude for the lessons because I have all these tools in this toolbox that didn't exist before. And I really couldn't imagine not having these tools. So, it was hard to collect them, yes, but I'm really grateful for them now and to be able to use them to support others.
Yeah. Who are your ideal clientele? Who are the type of people that you're helping?
So my current audience, I'm focused on moms who have this calling inside them to write and speak their story in some fashion. And, I'm not here to convince anybody that writing a book is the way, because you have a calling inside of you. You don't need me to convince you. And it's the people who know that they're not the only ones who've gone through what they've gone through. They know that their story will matter and help other people either not feel alone or process or learn or grow or whatever it is. And then they have this calling and knowing, but there's this like fear I hear over and over again. I don't know where to start. This task is overwhelming. It's huge. And realistically, the I don't know where to start is masked underneath it's too emotionally challenging to relive what I went through, to write it down, to speak it out. What will people think? What will they say? All of that I'm really wanting to help those moms, especially unwind.
So let's take it back. How did you, I want to talk about your story next, but first off, how did you begin with your story? Was it pen and paper? Was it just these thoughts? Did you speak it out loud? How did you kind of begin listening?
After my divorce was finalized, so once the worst of it all was over, I had this literally it was this message that just kept repeating in my head. It was very loud. It was, call it spirit guided message, wherever you land on that spectrum. It was this deep knowing that I succeeded at a seemingly impossible scenario and that my story needed to be told because there were so many others who had gone through similar things. There were many other people who've been married to people who've committed atrocious crimes. There are many other people who've been in abusive relationships. There are many other people who had to fight for custody, who experienced parental alienation, all of the things. And that I needed to tell the story. It needed to be a book. I knew that was one of the first steps, but it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to go write a book, open up a paper, just write a book. Like it doesn't, that task is intimidating if you've never written a book before. And so I really had to sit with it. And I hadn't even hardly shared outside of my immediate circle any of my story when I got the message to write a book. And so there was a lot of pieces to unravel to do that. I mean, yes, so you start at chapter 1, but it's not that simple. And so writing it out, speaking it out, starting to share other pieces was the beginning of how I started. But then as I started actually writing, reliving in detail everything I went through was another opportunity to experience those things again and actually release them in a whole different way. And so it got easier as I went, but every single time I was bumped up against that doesn't feel good in my body, something is coming up, now what? And so, that process took me over 2 years. And I think that's, if anything, on the short end for a lot of people.
Did you find when you were writing your story that you kind of blanked out some of it, or you're like all of a sudden a couple details that you couldn't place where they went on your timeline, or was it all
Yes.
pretty much like fresh right there? Okay.
So the very gist of it, I literally sat down and probably wrote just constantly for, I don't even know how many hours. I just got into this really clear, like almost like you're going to sit down next to me and I'm just going to tell you what happened. And so I wrote it that way to start. And then every time I would read through it, my memory would be triggered. Oh, this other piece. Oh, this other piece. And so then it would get put in. And then I would go through my notes because I was taking copious rounds of documentation. And then I would go through my photo album. And so everything would trigger new memories, but it wasn't all there in the beginning. And it all had to come through piece by piece so that I could process it in that sense, right? So I had an overall, I didn't outline it, but I told it in a shortened context and then it grew each time.
Yeah, that's super. It's almost a therapy in itself.
100% it is. I actually think it's far better than therapy because it was me writing it through my now experience, reflecting on everything that happened in a different way.
Yeah, and I know for me when I was in therapy, I was a people pleaser, so I was filtering the words I would say to my therapist as to like not make her feel bad or make myself look better or anything. So when it's just you and a piece of paper or you and a computer, there's no editing. It's just
Correct.
It's just you.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about the reason why you wrote the book.
Yeah. So the book story begins in 2016. In April, my children at the time were 1 just turned 4 and 5, almost 6. And one day my husband doesn't come home. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I've been staying home the whole time my kids were little. So I hadn't worked in almost 6 years. Kids were my life. Everything I did was about, you wake up, you got the 3 young little boys. And so their preschools, kids activities, that was my world. My husband worked long hours, but he had never not come home. And so one night he does not come home. He responds to text messages until about 9 o'clock and says he's on his way. And then he doesn't appear. 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm calling hospitals, freaking out. I've got 3 young children asleep. I can't go finding him. 5 o'clock in the morning, I got the idea to call non-emergency dispatch just because I didn't know who else to call. It's like, he's not been missing 24 hours. I can't report him missing, but where is he? And they said, let me transfer you to the jail. We'll see if he's there. Call us back. If not, we can help you. I'm like, okay, I'll call you right back. Furthest thing from my mind. The jail answers and they say, yes, we have him. What? What do you mean you have him? On what charge? Like, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. And they tell me the charge is attempted human trafficking with a $250,000 bond. I about dropped the phone. I didn't even know what that charge meant. My mind is going to these Hollywood scenarios because I have no idea how this could possibly be realistic. We live in this tiny little Colorado town. What do you mean human trafficking? And so there's a big cognitive dissonance at play, right? This is so outside of my understanding, so outside of my normal. There must be some other explanation. Maybe he is dead in a ditch somewhere and somebody stole his wallet, and then like that's where my mind goes. That's these explanations I'm trying to come up with. And so I eventually, get the money to bond him out. We did thankfully have investment money I was able to access within a couple of days and get him out so I could actually, in my mind, this is not where he belongs. I have to help because something is going on. And I bond him out of jail, and he tells me that he had been soliciting adults his entire adult life. And he's very, very flippant about this. Like, this is no big deal. But when they offered children, he thought, that he needed to figure out if it was real so he could report it. But he never would have done such a thing. And as he's telling me this, I have almost zero emotional response. I'm in this complete state of shock. I can barely, the words coming out of his mouth sound like another language because this makes no sense.
Yeah, this is the guy you go to bed with every night.
Right. We've been married 6 years. We've been together 9. Like, what?
Yeah.
And so his story is basically they're trying to frame him for something that he didn't do. And this, he was trying to explain to them and he was trying to report it and all these things. And he's terrified, rightfully so, because this charge is a very serious felony and carries lots of jail time and all these things. And this isn't what he did. Like, okay, he fucked up, but he's not that bad, right? That's the story. He's the victim in this situation, right? And I'm terrified. I've not worked in, yes, I know. It's amusing today, but I'm terrified. I've never made income like he's made. I don't know how to support 3 young kids. I'm overwhelmed. I'm freaking out. So I'm just like, we're just going to deal with this. I don't know what that means, but we're going to deal with this. And the other thing to say here is I had a lot of abandonment wounding myself after my parents split and my dad was no longer in my life. And I carried this belief in this story that every child needs access to both parents and that I blamed my mother for taking my dad away. That was the story in my head. And so I was never going to do that to my children because I knew what that was like. And in fact, even when she suggested that I move away some closer to where I had support because his family was there, but mine was not, how dare you suggest I take my kids away, right? I'm not doing with them, but you did. And so all of this wounding is at play. All of these fears are at play. These are the stories in my head.
And we're always trying to protect. We're always trying to protect our kids from something we haven't healed from yet. Like, we have no business. But anyways.
100%. That is exactly what I was doing. I was trying to protect them from my own wounding. Mm-hmm. And I was placing all of my own trauma into the situation, which was not the same in any fashion. My dad was abusive. He did actually hit my mom and she did fight to protect us. But in my head, well, he didn't do that to us and I still wanted a relationship with him, right? So I had all of this stuff going on. And so I stayed. I convinced myself I had no choice because my kids, in order for them to be okay, based on my, version of the universe, they needed both parents. And the only way that was going to work is if I stayed because he was better if I stayed. Mm-hmm. And so I had no choice. This is what I had to do. And I convinced myself that our relationship was going to be better because all of the secrets were out. People heal from infidelity, right? No problem. It's, I completely gaslighting myself. And every time any kind of emotions would come up, it would shove them back down. And if they wouldn't go back down, then he would continue with the gaslighting with, I'm better. I'm never going to do this again. You are my whole world. All of the love bombing, right? All of it. Everything that I ever wanted him to say, because remember, he worked long hours and was very not present prior. So now all of a sudden he was hyper present. So the relationship I always wanted was going to be here, right? So I had all of this going on in my mind, in my head, everything else. He goes through the criminal proceedings. Now, the other thing a lot of people don't realize is most of these cases get pled out. So all of the fears about him going to prison forever, not even founded. He received a plea deal for 4 years of probation, and that's it. if he would plead guilty to attempted solicitation of a minor. And so they don't even, most of the time, want to even take this further. And so, of course, he's like, I have to take it. This is a sweet deal in a sense. I have to go through treatment. I'll be on the sex offender registry, which I don't like any of these things. But I felt like, again, I had no choice. I didn't get a say in this matter.
You wanted that marriage and that life more than anything. And that's a very relatable experience.
Exactly. And so I stayed. And because in Colorado, at least, every state is a little bit different, but in Colorado, a sex offender does not lose their constitutional right to parent unless their child is their victim. And so he retains his full legal rights to his children, unsupervised access to his kids. He couldn't be around other children, but he can move back home. He could be around us. I thought this was like, we can heal. We can get better, all these things. So this is now 2017. And I also realized that his mental health is deteriorating drastically because he's not been exposed, right? So I don't understand all these pieces. I just know that he can't focus. He can't do anything other than like be at home. So I realized I need to go back to work. I'm not going to make a ton of money, but maybe I can eventually get there. I also have this knowing inside of me that I cannot be dependent on him forever. Like, as much as I want to hold this together, this other part of me knows that if I stay, and it's just going to get harder, and maybe things get better, but I need to have, like, I'm starting to figure out what my next plan is. So I go back to work in 2017. And when I go back to work, I start to like further divide myself, because now at work, I don't want anybody to know about my home life. I don't want anybody to know who my husband is. There were articles in the paper. This was public, like, information. This was a very small town, a sting operation, worked with Homeland Security. This was a whole big ordeal. I didn't even want people to realize that my last name was the same as his. Like, I was full, don't look at me. I wouldn't say his name, nothing. And then at home, I'm trying to keep my family together.
Right.
And so I'm completely divided. But I start to eventually realize that work is a safe place, because now I'm not just a mom, and I have a brain and I can use it, and I'm good at my job. And I start to enjoy, like, talking to adults again, which is, something, especially moms of young children, kind of forget that we have this whole other part of our lives. And so I'm kind of having this problem where I don't know how to mix my worlds. And, company Christmas party sends me into a panic attack because you're supposed to, like, invite your spouse, and I don't want to do that. And I start to realize that which world is the problem, right? Which one is the issue if I'm trying to keep my home life together, but I don't want to mix this other now safe place. And my body is starting to feel this anger bubble up inside of me. Every time my husband is trying to initiate intimacy, I keep having the story repeated. This is how he looked at them. This is what he did with them. Like, there's, like, literally ghosts everywhere. That's what it feels like. And I can't shove it away. I can't shut it up. I start drinking half a bottle of wine. Then I can be affectionate, right? And I'm like, this is not healthy. This is not okay. I'm not okay. And the next thing that happens is I find myself attracted to a coworker because, I'm looking for my escape. And that magnetic attraction is only getting louder. And I'm just like, I'm a mess. And so I realize I know what it's like to be cheated on. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to say the thing. I'm going to say, I'm not doing well. I want to pursue this. I need to change something. And my husband at the time says, first he tries to talk me out of it, and then immediately flips and says, okay, you go do what you need to do, and I will stay, and we'll stay together. He wants to move downstairs, and we'll be weird and normal. You can go date, no problem. And of course, this is pulling at my, let's not break the family up. Let's not have the kids go back and forth, right? Like,
it's like the perfect answer.
Perfect answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's pretty weird to date a coworker while you're living with your husband, right?
Sure, but it's...
but
I mean,
I also...
At this point, right? At this point.
Yep. But at the same time, this was this amazing opportunity. I got to have fun again. I got to go out and remember joy and feeling appreciated and be with somebody who did not carry ghosts everywhere they went. And that was healing in its own way.
Yeah.
But I found myself even more and more frustrated with my ex-husband, or we're still married at the time. and more wanting him away, but he wouldn't leave the house. And so if I wanted to spend time with my children, he was there. And so now it was further disassociating me with my kids. And I was either at home with him and them or not. And so that wasn't great either. And I could feel myself being pulled apart in a different way. And then the next thing that happens is I get promoted at work. And so now my boyfriend is going to be my employee, which is a no-no. And I'm like, okay, enough already. Enough already. I broke up with him. I need to deal with my marriage. I need to, like, I appreciate you. You've been amazing, but
Yeah.
I gotta deal with my household.
Yeah, it was like a pause so you could figure out what was next,
Yes.
kind of.
It was a pause. And the moment I did that, my husband wants to get back together. And he's like,
Oh,
okay, you got yours. We're even now. Yeah. And he continued to do this false equivalence thing where you went and dated. So now we're equal. And so we can start over. And it was this mind fuckery, truthfully, because part of me did feel guilty for having those feelings and doing those things and for feeling like I was not present with my kids in the way that they needed.
yeah.
And he was
Well,
pulling in all of that.
yeah, he's super manipulative. Like,
Oh, yes.
obviously, he's.
This is the beginning of the manipulatives. Right? And I'm feeling all of this. And I feel like
Mhm.
I don't know what to do. I've supported him through his criminal trial, right? He's still at home. He has full access to the kids. What the heck? And I can feel the manipulation underneath it all. But I also feel, because I still have this wounding with my dad, I'm like, okay, he's an asshole, but that's my problem, right? That's my problem, not their problem in my head, which, hindsight again. So when I refuse to get back together, he files for divorce because he now wants to use the court system to terrify me because he knows how much I do not want my kids to go through this.
Yeah.
So he files for divorce and files to try to kick me out of the house because he's now the primary parent in his head. And so therefore, I'm the one who's been abandoning the kids because I went back to work, right? That's me doing all these things. So all of my mom guilt for no longer being home full time, for having a life is right here that he's pulling on. It doesn't work, thankfully, and he eventually is required to move. And now we're splitting kids 50-50 with the kids with lots and lots of transitions because the way it all handled in court, there's like 4 transitions a week, which is crazy making. And I'm trying to figure out how the heck am I going to put this together? Because from the eyes of the court, he is an equal parent. And yet I'm starting to feel that there's a whole lot more going on under the surface. But I have to prove it because the court system does not protect anybody. It is only punitive if you can prove that something has already happened. It's not like he's a jerk, so he shouldn't be around. That doesn't work. And it's frustrating and exhausting, and yet this is the system we live in. And so I hire parental rights evaluators. Every state has a different version of what this is, but it's a specialist that is hired for the court that goes and makes a recommendation, usually a mental health professional, interviews people, does evaluations, that kind of thing. They're very expensive, but I felt like I needed professional assistance.
Yeah.
And I remember saying when I hired her, well, somebody else can figure this out because I don't know how to do this because I'm still pulling myself in multiple directions. Part of me still wants to believe that he can heal and get better because I can't imagine my family. And yet I'm like, that's not what's happening. And how do I protect my kids? And how do I it's too much. So we hire her, and my kids' behavior after the back and forth starts just deteriorates worse. They're really aggressive. The term is parental alienation. He starts telling them, I left them. I'm leaving the family. I'm doing this, right? So they're now mad at me. It escalated to the point where they were physically violent with me to even come to my house.
Yeah, and what are their ages at this point?
At this point, so this is 2018 now. So we're 8, 6, and 3, right? So very young still, very easily bought into whatever mommy or daddy says.
Yeah.
Right? And he's playing Disneyland Dad, so lots of video games, lots of sugar. They're literally going through withdrawals in their body every time they come back to my house because I don't parent that way. And, it's the things like if you do this, I'll give you a piece of candy, right? That was his parenting style. which, you know, ends up adding and escalating here. But basically, I'm in this really high conflict, trying to hold my boundaries, trying to go to work, trying to do all these things. And the recommendation comes out and basically still says essentially 50-50, because even when people are assholes,
Yeah.
even when people are assholes, they still have their court statutes to follow. And he's now been diagnosed with personality disorders. And so recommendations are like he should get therapy about those things, but that's nothing, this is the statutes. And I'm like, well, I guess
I'm the crazy one, right?
Yeah, I guess this is what right. And that's how I feel like maybe I am psychologically normal according to this particular evaluator, which honestly at this point was a relief.
Yeah.
Because they really make you feel like the crazy person. And I continued to feel like the crazy person with the way that he would speak to me. And so we tried to make a settlement and he went silent because there was one piece of it where it wasn't 50-50. I got slightly more decision making they in school and extracurriculars because he couldn't manage those things.
Yeah.
And he was not okay with that. Yep. He wanted 50-50 across the board because that's how he engaged with me. If we had to talk about the kids, we had to make joint decisions. Then he can continue to, use them in that way.
Mm-hmm. So and this whole time you're silent though about all the stuff, like all the ghosts that you talked about, all the things that are going on in your head. Are they just like piling up? It's still, you're just trying to
it's just piling up.
Maintaining the status quo.
There's no outlet. There's this massive mask because I have a full-time job. I'm now managing an IT department of a global corporation. I have 3 kids that I have half the time. And so, we're very scheduled in our day. And I'm just doing my best to stay above water. And I'm one of those kind of people. I'm amazing in a crisis because I know how to compartmentalize. I grew up with lots of various pieces. And so I just compartmentalized it all. Now, granted, every single transition was high conflict and was called panic attacks. And I was diagnosed with PTSD at this point. And I did go to therapy, at least to kind of get it out. But even my therapist is like, this is crazy. I don't know why this is the way it is. This is not how it's supposed to be.
Right.
And so I had some validation there, but it doesn't seem like there's anything I can do. Right. I'm doing the things that everybody's telling me to do. And then my kid's behavior gets worse. And so my middle son, he's very emotional. He's the empathetic kid and all spectrums of that. And he starts disclosing more things going on. I was driving him to school. So trigger warning for anybody listening, but I was driving him to school and I'm literally practicing a presentation in my head because I'm going to give a all company presentation. So I'm repeating it in my head as I'm driving. I'm tuning the kids out, just focused on what's next in front of me. And I pull up and the kids are getting out of the car and he looks over at me and he says in this very excited voice, "Sometimes they suck on daddy's fingers." And he gets out of the car. And my whole body goes, "What?" But you can't say anything. You can't respond. You can't react. I don't know what to do. I'm in the middle of a high conflict divorce. I call my lawyers. They're very cautious because if you make new accusations in the middle of a divorce like that, you can be seen as alienating parents.
I was going to say, you're the crazy person again.
You're the crazy person, right? You're the one trying to prevent the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I go to my kid's therapist and she asked me to have him show me what that game looks like. And it was as bad as I imagined.
Mm-hmm.
And so then she said, if he had done that for me as a mandatory reporter, I would have to report it. So now I had the pieces in place to report it, called Child Protective Services. I will tell you, they are often useless. The man showed up in my house, tried to interview my son. He hid under the dining room table, terrified of the man. And now I know how much wounding he has with men in general. He was never going to feel safe around this man and said, "Oh no, we don't do that anymore." So they dropped it. And I'm trying to tell him, wait, this is the guy who was arrested for trying to purchase children, right? All of this is coming flooding back at me. And I'm seeing all of the red flags that I missed, even in the beginning of our relationship. I'm seeing all of the manipulations and I'm seeing it all stack up. But because what I'm faced with is these children in this situation, I feel like nobody is listening, but nobody can do anything. And and I have to continue to give my kids 4 times a week to this man, right? I can't just pile him in a car and drive to Canada as much as my mom body wants me to. I feel like there's nothing I can do. And so when CPS drops the case and all these other things, this is rock bottom, right? Everything is everything is piled up. There's no way out. I don't see how, and I see the writing on the wall, right? I can see where this is going because every time I try to do something, he's still given access. It's just, this is just the way it is. So, we drop the settlement. We realize we're going to go to court, and I have to figure out how I'm going to navigate this. How am I going to present this case in court? What am I going to do? And I'm speaking to my therapist at the time. So I'm in therapy, and we're trying EMDR. We're trying some other things to help me regulate my nervous system. It's not really working, but I'm doing the things because I'm willing to do every recommendation the court gives me to help process all of this. And as I'm leaving one day, my counselor says, "Have you ever thought about seeing a psychic?" I was like, "You what? Huh?" Like, that's the last thing I expected her to say. And I was like, huh? Like a fortune teller? And my mom was very spiritual growing up, but I had a really low belief tolerance, right? And do you know somebody who's real? Like, huh? And she says, "I do. I'm going to send you a name." She's like, "All right, you know what?
Why not?
I'm going to try anything. Fuck it."
Yes.
And so I go see this lady, and I find out from her that she's one of these like near impossible to get into people, booked out forever. And I'm like, okay, I'm here. I'm gonna keep an open mind. I don't know why I'm here, and she's telling me how her gifts work and all these things. And I'm trying to just, okay, she wants to help me. How can she help me? And she starts telling me the story about past life of mine 500 years ago. And I'm with the same man, and he was a drunk and abusive, but it was not that bad. It was okay-ish until the kids came. And then the way she's talking about me and my relationship is that I was trying to protect the kids from the relationship, and I was staying because of all these things. And it's like she's in my head, and she's saying all the things that I had been thinking this whole time about why I had to stay, because I couldn't, and I was, scared to be on my own. I couldn't support us, all these things. And I'm like, okay, I'm listening, right? Like you didn't know all of this about my history, right? I'm listening because, I also want to hear what she has to say at this point.
Yeah, I want to. Yeah.
Right. And then she tells me his name, and the name is like the French version of his name. His name is just Charlie in real life, and he says John Charles. And I'm like, oh, all right. Oh, I'm listening. And then she says, in this life, it escalated to the point that he beat you to death, and you fell down the stairs and in front of the kids. And my whole body had this like response. And she said, that fear that you're feeling right now, that's what you have to get a hold of, because that's this life, not today. And I knew that I was terrified of him. He'd never laid a hand on me, but he was mentally and emotionally manipulative. He at this point was literally stalking me. Like he would walk up and down in front of my house. And I had professionals tell me that he will be peeping in your windows if you don't get further away, because we tried to make a close living arrangement work, right?
Wow.
And I just felt so much fear because I felt like he was in my head and that he was going to like get to me. And so she's telling me, that's why you're so afraid of him, and that you need to get a handle on that fear, because that is not now, and that you're not living back then. You own property, you can have a job, you can do all these things to support your kids. And I'm like, well, I am doing those things, right? I am doing those things. Why isn't it working? And then she says, the reason you're sitting in this chair, the reason your angels created this session was because you have not made a choice. It's like, what do you mean? Right? I'm choosing. She says, no, you have not chosen. And it was in this moment, the way she said it to me, everything that led up to it, it was like I saw myself clearly for the first time. And I saw that she was right. I actually didn't want to be in this situation. I wanted my marriage. I wanted my family. I wanted to believe that there was still another explanation, even with everything my kids were saying. I wanted to believe some other possibility. I was still holding on to this like glimmer of, in some future reality, that we would even get back together, because I wanted my family. It wasn't even the marriage. It was the family unit that I wanted. I wanted this thing that I didn't have myself growing up, right? Mm-hmm. But I was so ashamed to admit that out loud, because right? He was a sex offender and did all these things. And so I was never going to admit that even to myself. And so because that was there, I wasn't even being honest with myself, and I wasn't choosing what I actually desired, because what I was choosing was to continue to play this game with him. And so when she said that and I saw this, and then she says, like, you need to choose to be done with him completely, done with this pattern. And I said, okay. And I stood up, I'm done. She says, okay, I can help you now. Okay, I don't know what that means. And then she says, everybody knows somebody, right? Everybody knows somebody, and you got to keep going. And you got to stop hiding, because I had hired people, but I wasn't talking about it. I wasn't asking for help beyond my immediate circle. I wasn't sharing. I was looking to the specialist to tell me what I should do. I wasn't saying, this is what needs to happen. How can you help me make this happen? I was continuing to give my power away, instead of now to my husband, to these other people, because I didn't want to take ownership. I didn't want to be the one to decide. And so I needed to be the one to decide in order to change it. And she had a bunch of logistical ideas of things to try, or people to work, and some of it worked, some of it didn't. But when I left that session, it was this huge shift in the way that I spoke to myself, the story I was talking to myself, the outcome I was creating. Instead of, this is crazy and this is happening to me, it was this, okay, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to come out of this? How am I going to take ownership of this? And literally leaving that day, I went and talked to other coworkers. One of them had an uncle who worked for ICE, put me in touch with Homeland Security. My realtor put me in touch with the DA, got the case file unsealed. Like, all of a sudden, evidence piled out of flipping nowhere. And not all worked, but evidence just kept coming. And I started recording my conversations with my kids. I started listening to them. I started seeing the trauma they were going through instead of being frustrated by their behavior, right? I started just collecting. And 6 weeks from that psychic visit was my divorce hearing. So I didn't have a ton of time, but it was enough. And I kept collecting. I kept going. We filed motions. Motions didn't work, which sent me into another spiral. And I went, okay, I need more evidence, right? I'm not a victim to this situation. There's a reason. I'm trusting. I'm going with it. And I had such a different perspective those 6 weeks. It was the hardest 6 weeks because I know what's happening and I'm still sharing custody. But I had determination and drive in a way that I hadn't had the entire other time. And I stood in court and I faced him and I spoke my truth. I spoke the things that my kids said and the reasons that I believed what I believed. And I was confident and protective. And this is my concerns. This is what I believe needs to happen. And the judge was appalled at some of the evidence that we brought forward. She immediately ordered him to stop sleeping with the children. She immediately ordered him to, and then a couple days later, overnights were completely revoked in the final order. She did give him one last chance, which people are also surprised by, but it's just the way the court systems work. She gave him one last chance to comply with a huge list of things. He had to get a job, he had to be therapies, he had to give disclosures, all these things. She was trying to set up enough barriers and gates that there would be enough protections in place. And if he did those things, he would get some custody. And if he didn't do those things, he would only get supervised visitation. And he did not a single one on those lists. Granted, now 2 weeks after the divorce, the pandemic hit. So divine timing, but the kids were never quarantined with him. And when those 6 weeks went up and he didn't file anything and supervised visitation was enacted, we have now not heard from him since April of 2020. And so nothing was ever put in place and he just vanished. And so when all of that happened, that's when I was like, I need to write a book because, I'm still giving you the cliff notes. So many other things happened amongst all of that. And that stepping into this version of myself where I became this empowered person to make the decisions and choices and to literally drive the ship changed everything in this impossible scenario. And I really want people to know that they can face anything if they're willing to change the story they speak to themselves. And they are willing to be honest with themselves and not sit in the shame of it, and to actually move through in a way that we can realize the beauty in the experience, because I look back and yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot. But I gained so much, and I have such a different relationship, and I'm such a different mom, and I'm so many different things now because of all of the pieces that I walked through. And so I don't look at it in a negative anymore.
Yeah, it's like when you put your foot down and it's like, we're not gonna take it.
Exactly. Exactly. And and I think that every mom especially, and you could extend that even bigger, but moms especially, we have this ability to be this fierce power. Nobody gets in between a mama bear and her cubs, right? Like, we have that energy. Nobody fucks with my babies. And if we, especially when it comes to our kids and these need to protect ourselves to protect them, there's nothing, we can be unstoppable. We just have to remember that power, and we can use that in other ways. I mean, when I succeeded at that, I was like, I feel like I can do anything. Like, that was this feeling that came over me. And that's the place that I really want to help other people connect to within themselves, because we really can if we just decide, like actually decide, instead of pull ourselves apart and talk down to ourselves and have all of this negative stuff build up.
Yeah, and the importance of this conversation too is I've dealt with stuff with my ex and the court systems and the stuff he did, and the judge was just like, well, you should have came sooner. Why did you wait so long? Now I'm not going to do anything. Our DA's like telling my ex some of the stuff that I talked about with the DA. You know, it's really important to just keep going. It's easy when a judge is telling you no to, and maybe it could be a parent, it could be a boss, but in our cases, we had similar issues with the judicial system. You have to trust your gut and just keep going. It doesn't matter who believes you, who doesn't. With your kids,
Yes.
like, you just got to keep going.
Exactly. You have to trust you first,
Yeah,
and you have to take care of you first. And so all of this belief around my kids need to be okay for me to be okay, so their needs come before my needs, that had to be flipped, right?
exactly.
I didn't know it at the time, but even dating, going back to work, allowed me to reconnect to different parts of myself, so that I was taking care of me, and I was putting me first, and I was learning about that, and I was feeling those things. And then how I spoke to myself and how I reminded myself that I actually need to trust my knowing, not what the court was saying, but I needed to trust what I knew to be true with me and with my kids, and follow that and not give up on it. I developed this, I can't fail if I don't stop. Maybe I don't succeed this time, but it's okay because I'm not stopping. And it let me know that at some point that outcome was out there. I didn't have to know when it was. I didn't have to know how it was going to happen, but it was out there because, damn it, I'm not going to stop till I find it.
Right. Yeah. And you did. And then
And I
not
did.
only that, you found your voice too. And I was
Yeah.
literally journaling this morning. Oh, I hate it when people use the word literally, but I just did it. That we all want the best for our children, and we want them to do things different and better. But we, as women, it's really, really hard to flip that script on ourselves and stand up and be the change that we need for us. Because there's no way we can teach our kids how to not be in that abusive relationship if we're stuck in it. Not only an abusive
100%.
relationship with somebody else, but ourselves.
100%. Exactly. If we're our own abuser, and if we're attracting abusive relationships, that's the model we're teaching our children.
Yeah.
And, the pattern has to stop with us. If we want to raise our kids to be awakened and not be healing from their childhood as they grow up, we got to do the work.
Yep. Yeah. And it's hard.
It's not easy. And it does get easier, but it is not easy. And it is a lifelong journey, and always new things come up, but you develop tools and you developed connections and support in a different way. Your perspective shifts. You see the bigger picture in every single situation. I can see this bigger picture, and I can see the potential for the lesson on the other side, even while I'm in it and it sucks.
So how can people, so I have a lot of questions, but I think a lot of it will be answered probably in the next minute or two on how people can connect with you
Yep.
and how you can help them flip that script
Yep.
and how maybe you can help them become that person they want to be.
Yeah. So they can connect with me on social media, Amanda Quick Healing or the Sex Trafficker's Wife. And you can also email me. My website, amandaquickhealing.com, has all my info. And I have a variety of ways I can help you. So if you want to just book a session, you can do that and we can have a conversation and we can talk through what's going on. I find that a lot of times people, when they come to me, they've been through therapy and they feel like they want to, there's more. And they need somebody who they feel safe with because they know they've been there in a different way. And I can be that person. And I also have developed my own intuitive abilities now. And we can talk on a mental, emotional, spiritual, or physical level, depending on where you are at. I also am running a program that I will likely continue to run, as it's a very deep calling in me to bring together the empowered mother, the stories, and the spirituality component to help people rewrite their stories, rewrite their own stories. And so we go from the story you were telling yourself to the catalyst event that's transforming the new story you get to be. And then that's literally the person that's rebirthing this experience for you. And then that's the story that you're actually here to share with others. And you become the channel of your own experience and you become this vessel of wisdom instead of the victim who, just didn't have any choices.
Well, cut that little part with my nose out. It's been itching for a while. I didn't want to say anything, or I don't want to do it while you're talking. Is there anything else you want to add for my listeners that might be going through something similar? Particularly the younger moms that they don't have the mom role model. They don't.
Yeah.
Where do you suggest they turn to?
I would truly suggest that you surround yourself with other empowered moms. If you may not have your own mom, reach out to me, reach out, to Steph here, reach out to other people who've gone through the shit. Like, find your tribe. And it may not be a traditional tribe, it may be a social media tribe. That's okay. There are so many other support groups on Facebook. My goal is to build a community of moms here. I'm starting my own podcast about awakened motherhood to share other stories like mine. And so, find those people who can lift you up. Find the people that speak to the way that you want to be spoken to, and the way that you want to learn to speak to yourself. Right. And so you may not have those conversations very nicely with yourself, but you need to make sure the people you're surrounding yourself with are not reinforcing that and are instead supporting you, reminding you of your power, of your ability. Every time you feel helpless, say, no, pick yourself back up. You got this. What is your gut saying? Teaching you how to feel into your body. Like, those are the skills and tools that I really want to pass on to others. And I think it's really important that you remind yourself that you were born with these abilities. You were born an intuitive being. You created this child. You birthed this child into the world. Your body knew how to do that. And even if you had a traumatic birth, your body still knew how to grow a human. And so tap into that, feel into that, and remind yourself that all of the times that you actually did know. How many times did our kids sick and we have an intuitive message or a knowing about what it is, and may not be what the doctor said, but like 9.9 times out of 10, we're right. And remind yourself of those things, right? Remind yourself of the times you were right instead of beat yourself for the times that you weren't, and build your repertoire of mantras and supports and all of the things so that you have it when you need it. And then when you get to the other side, you get to reflect back on all of this amazing things you've overcome.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been an awesome podcast. I feel like we might do another one. I would love to
Okay.
share my story and we can compare notes because they're very similar. Just drowning out that noise in our heads just to keep going I'm sure everyone's gone through that, but it's not enough people talk about that.
No, they don't. They don't. You gotta write the story of the person you desire to be,
Yeah.
and then you get to learn how to be that person.
Yeah. And then you quiet the monsters when you let them out.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.